Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Gittin Dakman Gimel. I'm excited to say that the Poland trip is almost full. So if you haven't registered and you were thinking about it, you might want to do that really soon. Just a few spots left. Okay, we're going to get started now with a question at the bottom of Membet Amud Bet. If you remember, we're talking still in this whole section about Avadim, and particularly we've been talking about this chetzi case, where someone is half freed, half not freed. But now we're going to start with a different question. Okay, we had a bunch of questions yesterday that we couldn't really figure out. We're going to get back to the half-half. Right now we're going to talk about an interesting situation. We're toward the bottom of Membet, about 6 lines from the bottom. Let me go back to a case we've seen. I think we've seen this before. It definitely comes up in the Gemara, where somebody sells their ketubah. Okay, now what does it mean to sell your ketubah? Selling your ketubah is, if I'm a woman, I'm married. What does it mean to sell my ketubah? Well, my ketubah is in the event it's worth money, in the event that my husband dies first or divorces me. So if I'm desperate for money while I'm married, I can theoretically sell my ketubah for the rights, right? Someone will buy it for less than it's worth because maybe they'll get nothing. It's kind of a gamble, right? But maybe if in the event that my husband dies first or divorces me, somebody will actually get money out of it. So it's worth money in a sense of like a gamble. Maybe you'll make money, maybe you won't. So likewise, can a master sell, or theoretically, right? That's the question. Is it a valid sale? If a master sells the rights to the knas payment, which we'll talk about in a second, that we saw already, but we'll remind you what it is. If an ox gores my slave and kills my slave, I get a payment of knas, 30 shekels. So what if I don't sell my slave, but I sell the rights to get the knas, that in the event that somebody attacks my eved, like an ox gores my eved and kills the eved, the slave, then instead of me getting the money, I've sold you the rights to that money. Does that work? So this goes back to this topic that comes up a lot in the Gemara of a machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Are you allowed to, or maybe it goes to it, we're going to see actually it doesn't, but they're going to connect it to this machloket of Adam makneh davar shelo ba'al olam, or lo makneh davar shelo ba'al olam. Can you sell something, or can acquire, meaning the buyer, can he acquire something that isn't in existence, right? This is clearly not in existence because there is no knas yet, because nothing's happened. So can you sell it or not? The ketubah is a little different because the ketubah exists and the rights to the ketubah exist. But here we're talking about a possible action that may or may not happen. It's so, who knows, can you actually sell that? So to which they say, Tibai le-Rabbi Meir, Tibai le-Rabbanan. We're going to ask this question both according to Rabbi Meir, who says you can actually sell rights to something that doesn't exist, and according to the rabbis who say you can't sell the rights to something that doesn't exist. Tibai le-Rabbi Meir. So we'll ask the question, here would be the question to Rabbi Meir. You could say, it only works in the following case, or a case like this. This is the case they usually talk about. I can sell you the rights to the dates on my palm tree, even if right now there's no dates, because we know that dates grow on this tree. So there's a very good chance, right? The dates are going to grow. It'd be very unlikely that no dates will grow on my tree. So I can sell you rights to the fruits from my tree. They're not in existence yet, but they will be. Number one, who knows if you'll even if the eved will get gored and die. Even if he does get gored and die, there might not even be a payment. Why not? Maybe, now let's go back to a basic law. Moded biknas patul. That means if you come to the court, if your ox gored my slave and killed my slave, and before witnesses came forward and said, this happened, you went to the court and said, listen, I want to admit what happened. You go to the court, you admit, you're actually exempt from payment. So it could be, even if it were to happen, there might not even be a knas payment because you might go admit it in court and then there'll be nothing to pay. So that's a question to Rabbi Meir. In other words, again, this is so unlikely that maybe he wouldn't even think that this is a case of davar shelo adam makneh davar shelo ba'al olam, that it would work. Secondly, we're now going to say, Tibai Rabbanan. Here's the question according to the rabbis. Now the rabbis say, we could say the rabbis said it, a person doesn't pass on, right? You can't acquire something that's non-existent. That would be kegon perot dekel. Now the perot dekel right now are not in existence at all. They don't exist right now. There's no fruits on the tree. It's the season where, the fruits are done. There's absolutely they don't exist anywhere. And that's why it doesn't work. But the only thing that doesn't exist is an action of having done damages. But the shore is in the world, the ox is there, even though we don't know what an ox it is. And the slave is in the world. In other words, there are things here that could lead to this action. So maybe it's more in this world than the other case. So, what's the situation? Can you actually sell? And again, this means I can sell it, but it might not mean you actually own it, right? It might not be a valid sale. So Rabbi Abba Tashma. Rabbi Abba is going to say, let's learn from here. We're going to go through a little bit of a long source. Only at the end are we going to connect it. So first, let's move our heads into just getting into the content of this source. Then we'll try to connect it, and then we'll reject the answer and say this doesn't answer our question at all. Yilid Bayit. Okay, to understand this Braita, we need to read the pasuk. We're talking about who can eat truma in the house of a kohen. Kohen ki kinyan nefesh, if he acquires a person, kinyan kaspo hu yochalbo, so anyone he acquires, like buying a slave, can eat the truma. V'yilid beito, and anyone born in his house, which basically means slaves born to the slaves, right? The children of the slaves. Heim yochlu belachmo, they can also eat his bread, meaning his truma. To which the Gemara says, "Yilid beito matam ulamar." You don't need to say the slaves that are born in his house, because in kinyan kesef ochel yilid bayit lo kol sheken. Wouldn't it be obvious if the slave can eat and his sons basically are, born in the household? Of course they can eat. They're slaves also, and they were born into it. Obviously they can eat truma. So ilu ken hayiti omel. So now he says. So again, why do you say yilid beito? It doesn't seem necessary. So so because it says it, I would say the following. Ma kinyan kesef sheyesh bo shaveh kesef ochel. Now notice what kinyan kesef is called, something I acquire with money. That means if it has value, right, then it gets to eat truma because it's a valuable asset to me. Af yilid bayit sheyesh bo shaveh kesef ochel. So now I can just assume, right, even if I didn't have yilid bayit in the pasuk, I would have assumed, just like kinyan kesef that's worth money, a slave that's worth money is valuable. I can eat truma in my house. Likewise, anyone born to that slave who's worth money can eat truma. So now the question is, minayin sha'af al pi she'eno shaveh klum. So what's the yilid bayit coming to teach me then? It's coming to teach me, what if this yilid bayit is not worth anything? Okay, let's say he can't work and he doesn't have any value. Talmud lamar yilid bayit mikom makom. Okay, it could be that he can't work because he's a baby, but it probably means more likely to say it means something happened to him. He's sick, right? And he can't work. So let's say yilid bayit, he's born in the house, he's not worth anything. How do you know he could still eat in the house? That's why it says, this is what we're going to learn from the fact that yilid bayit appears in the pasuk. Talmud lamar yilid bayit mikom makom. Anyone born into the household, doesn't matter if he's worth nothing. V'adayin ani omer yilid bayit ben she'er. So now, according to the way we read this pasuk, kinyan kesef, we're going to assume is you have value. Yilid bayit is extra to teach you that if you're born in the household and you're not worth anything, you still get to eat truma. So that only teaches us, though, a yilid bayit who's not worth anything. What if you have a kinyan kesef, a slave who's not worth anything? So that's what the Gemara is going to ask. So adayin ani omer, at this stage, all we have is, though, yilid bayit ben sheyesh bo shaveh kesef ben she'en bo shaveh kesef. A yilid bayit, you're born into the household, you're a slave, born to a slave in your house. Either you're worth something or you're not. Either which way you get to eat truma. But kinyan kesef, yesh bo shaveh kesef ochel, en bo shaveh kesef eno ochel. But are you going to say that if a slave, let's say all of a sudden something happens, the slave gets sick and isn't worth anything, they can't eat truma in your household? Talmud loma, kinyan kaspo v'yilid beito. There's a juxtaposition of these in the pasuk. We call that a hekesh. That's to teach you, ma yilid bayit af al pi she'eno shaveh klum ochel, af kinyan kaspo af al pi she'eno shaveh klum ochel. Because of the juxtaposition, we learned even a slave who's not worth anything can eat truma in your household. So basically, we started with Yelid Kesef, Yelid Bayit is extra. That comes to teach you a Yelid Bayit who's not worth anything can eat truma. Then we use a Hekesh, the two are next to each other. Even a slave who you acquired, if he's now worth nothing, he can eat truma. Okay, that was all the back. What do we do with this source? What does this source teach us? Well, they say something very smart, Rabbi Abba says, although he'll get rejected. If you think that you can sell the rights to the knas, again, if he gets gored and killed, you can sell those rights to somebody else. Any eved is always worth something. He might not be able to work, but he's potential money that you can gain, because if there's knas, you can sell him, right? You can sell him for the knas, for the chance that maybe he'll get gored and die. And since you can sell him for that, he has value. What does value mean? Value means you can sell him in the shuk. So there's obviously value to every slave then. Doesn't matter if he's sick or whatever it might be. Well, the Gemara says, no. No, we could find a case where you couldn't sell him for knas. Okay. In other words, they wanted to say this obviously means you can't sell them for knas, because if you could sell them for knas, there'd never be a situation. This is all because the Braita assumed there's a situation of a slave who's not worth anything. And this basically says there's no such thing. But then they're going to find such thing. Ika eved treifa, there's an eved who's about to die. Let's say, a treifa usually isn't an animal. It's an animal that will die within 12 months. So if the slave has a disease that's going to cause the slave to die within 12 months, he's not going to get knas. Why not? Because knas is the value of your life. And this person has a very low value of life because their life is about to end. So they're not worth anything in the marketplace. So therefore, there's no knas for them either. Or right now, we're going to assume they're not worth anything. To which the Gemara says, but he could still stand up before his master. Some people think this means he could stand in respect for his master, and that's worth something. Some people say, no, he could actually still work. Just because you're going to die within 12 months doesn't mean you're not worthy of working for, you could probably do something. So you're worth something for your worth now. So that, again, you wouldn't be not worth anything. To which the answer, right? Either it's a despicable person who, let's say, it wouldn't be respectful for him to go in front of the master and show respect because he's a despicable person. The master doesn't want him there. Or mukachchin, that someone who has something wrong with him that he can't even, right? He has all these boils and he can't even work. Okay. So basically, in the end, we reject this proof because you could find a situation where an eved isn't worth anything, even it, right? Where you can't sell him for knas, even though theoretically you could have sold him for knas, where he really isn't worth anything because there is no knas payment at all. Okay. So we don't have an answer to our question whether can you sell an eved for the knas or not. We now have a half slave, half free person who we already learned is not allowed to marry, not a slave woman and not a maidservant and not a free woman and not a Jewish woman. But what if he did? What if he betrothed a Jewish woman? Okay. Is the kiddushin valid or not? Right? We have all sorts of situations you might remember from Yevamot where we discuss you might betroth someone, but it doesn't always mean that the betrothals are valid. So, Imtim Tzalomar Ben Yisrael Sha'amar Lebat Yisrael. Okay, now we're going to go to a sugi in kiddushin. Depends on the language you use. If you betroth half a woman, what does that mean? You say hitkatshi, or you betroth half of yourself to a woman. That's going to be the two cases. Hitkatshi lechetzi. He says, you're betrothed to half of me. Mikudeshin. That actually works. And why does that work? Because what did you probably mean when you said you're betrothed to half of me? Okay, again, not nowadays, but in those days you could marry two women. So you could be saying, I'm betrothing you to half of me because what I'm trying to say is beware that I might actually take another wife. Okay, so you're getting half of me. I might be reserving the other half for somebody else. At least it's likely that's what you're saying. And therefore it actually is a good betrothal because you're basically saying I'm fully betrothed to you. It's just I might also go ahead and marry someone else. If you say, right, so Ben Yisrael, let's try to compare it to that case. In that case, it works. But that's because Chazia Lekule, because she can actually marry and be betrothed to the entire of this person. Okay, even if he takes another wife, she's still betrothed to him completely. Halo Chazia Lekule. But in this case, he can't, there he can be fully married to her. Here he can't, all of him can't be betrothed to her because half of him is not free. So that half can't be betrothed. So even though that might work, this case might not work with the slave. The intim talomer, and if you take the other case there, which is a ben Yisrael makadesh chatzi isha ena mekudesh, if he says to a woman, I'm betrothing half of you, that doesn't work. Because what would that mean? Well, half of you can still, right, be free to go marry another man. Now that obviously can't be because women can't marry two men. So if you say that doesn't work and therefore maybe this doesn't work, well, again, there's a difference. No, he left off half. In other words, he could have betrothed her entirely and he only betrothed half. That's why it doesn't work because he left off part. But in this case, ha'eved lo shiur b'kinyano. He didn't leave off any part of him. He betrothed her the half that could be betrothed completely, right? There's one half that could be betrothed, which is the free side of him. So that side was completely betrothed to her. So maybe you look at it like that. Whereas the other side couldn't be betrothed. That's not leaving over. That's just, he's ignoring that part, right? What he's saying is the part that could be betrothed to is being betrothed completely. So maybe it actually would work. So what's the answer? We're not going to get to a clear answer here either. Tashma, let's learn from here. And now we're going to go back to something we saw yesterday and raise a good question that I didn't think about yesterday when we learned it, but it's an obvious question. Remember, if somebody kills someone who's in this half-half stage, noten chatzi knas l'rabo v'chatzi kofer liyorshav. What happens? Half the knas goes to his master, and half the kofer, in other words, again, we view this person as a split. We have the half that's free. So that half is supposed to get kofer, because if you're a free person, you get ransom payment, right? Who gets it? Your family, you're dead. So your family gets it. So who gets it in this case? Well, it goes to his heirs. Now, what heirs? He can't be married. So how could he have heirs if he can't be married halachically? He has to have halachic heirs, right? And these heirs are, even if he has children, they're not his heirs because he's half slave, half free man. So comes the Gemara and says, well, if you want to say, kiddushin, yorshim minaled. If you say his kiddushin is not valid, then there's no way this chetzi eved, chetzi ben chorin could possibly have heirs. Again, he could have children, born from wherever, but they won't be his heirs. So so therefore it seems like his kiddushin is kiddushin, because look, he has heirs. So if the kiddushin is valid, now he shouldn't have gotten married because he's not supposed to, but if he does, it has validity. So that's how he would have yorshim. So Rav Adabar Ava, kishasa asa otrefa, umay yorshav nafshi. This is a very strange explanation of this source, and Rav is going to jump on him on two counts. But so if you think it doesn't make sense, don't worry, it doesn't really. But he suggests this case where he's getting the knas and we split, we have the half knas goes to the master and the half ransom goes to his heirs. Doesn't really mean it goes to his heirs, and it doesn't really mean he died. He actually became a treifa. Okay, the ox gored him, and now he's going to die at some point in the next year. But what happens? So what do we do? At this point, since he's a treifa, since he's going to die, the assumption is he gets the payment, and therefore the ransom, okay, so the half knas goes to his master, the one that's his master. Half of the ransom goes to lenafshe, not his yorshim, not his heirs, but he himself, because he's still alive. That resolves the issue. Who are the heirs that are getting this money? Oh, it's him himself. Doesn't really resolve any issue, though, because I'm a rabbi. I have two problems with this commentary. Hada di yorshav katani. Number one, it says heirs. It doesn't say himself. So it doesn't fit the wording. Ve'od koferhu. Also, we're talking about ransom. Now, when do you get the ransom? You only get ransom after death. It's true, you might die from this, or you're going to die from this, but you don't get ransom until you're actually dead. So there wouldn't be a ransom payment that would go to himself. That doesn't make any sense. So El Amarava, what does it mean? The chetzi kofer goes to the heirs. Ra'oili tova enlo. The heirs should get it, but they can't. This is like we saw before. Amemar said, you're supposed to give him a get shichur, but you can't, right? There's sometimes where you're supposed to do something, but you actually can't do it. So what it's saying is half the knas goes to the master, that we can do. But the half that's supposed to go to his heirs, well, there's nothing we could do because he doesn't have heirs. But theoretically, half is supposed to go to him, okay, his family. But he doesn't have family. So there's nothing to do. Okay, so what did we do so far? Let's just review because we got off on all sorts of different things and it got confusing, but it's a very simple structure so far. We started asking this question, can you sell the knas of your eved, the potential that if your eved were to get killed, the money would go to someone else instead of to the master? We tried to bring a source from the Sili Bayit to say there is no, right, well, it wouldn't make sense that if you could sell knas, everyone would have value, but in the end, we found cases anyway, and therefore we couldn't answer that question. Then we asked, can the half person betroth the woman? Again, he can't by Jewish law, but if he does, is there validity to this kiddushin? Is it considered a betrothal or not? We tried to prove it from this source, but we couldn't in the end, okay? And we tried to prove it from also these other cases of a man who betroths for half and a man who betroths half a woman, but we said those cases are different and therefore you can't learn from them. And then we tried to prove it from this Hatzi Kofer to his Yorshim, it must be kiddushin is valid. And then we just explained, no, it doesn't really go to his heirs. It just theoretically should go to his heirs, but he doesn't have heirs. Again, it could be he does, but it's just not conclusive. So again, we're left with inconclusive answers. I'm a rabbi, but now we're going to have a few piskei halacha about not a man who's half-half betrothing a woman who's completely Jewish, but the opposite. We have a man who's fully Jewish betrothing a woman who's a half-half. Okay, which really I think is one and the same, should make a difference. If one is valid, the other should be valid, but it doesn't seem to, right? It's interesting, they bring it separately and have a discussion about it. I'm a rabbi. Rava says, just like betrothing half a woman, like we said before, there is no such thing as betrothing half a woman, and she's not betrothed. It's an invalid statement. Rava says this is not valid. And also, Darish Rabba Bar Rav Huna, this is the exact same thing as Rava. She's not betrothed. Amarle Rav Chisda said, how can you compare? In other words, what he's doing is saying, both of them said, you can't compare. You just like you can't betroth a half a woman, you can't, who's fully Jewish, you can't betroth this woman who's half Jewish. Okay, you can't do that. So Rav Chisda says, Midani, these aren't similar, exactly as we said earlier. Why are they not similar? Hatam Shiur b'kinyan, no. There he only betrothed half of 100%, right? He betrothed 50% out of 100%. He could have betrothed the full woman. He only betrothed half. There's no validity to that. There's no such thing as marrying half a woman. No, but here he betrothed 50% of the person, but it was 100% of what he could have betrothed because it was 100% of the 50% that was free. So he didn't leave over anything, which means it actually could be valid. So Rav Chisda goes against Rabba Bar Rav Huna, also against Rabba, but Rabba wasn't in the scene. Basically, he has this conversation with Rabba Bar Rav Huna, and he says, you're wrong. Okay, or your comparison isn't a valid comparison. So let's see what Rabbi Bar Rav Huna's reaction is, and this is the kind of thing that we should publicize because it would be good if people took lessons from him. Hadar Okim Rabbi Bar Rav Huna Emora Ale. He goes and gets a translator, which really doesn't mean, an Emora, who is called usually the Metorgaman, which isn't really a translator, but it was the microphone. In other words, I'm going to go make a big public announcement now, and I'm going to get someone to announce it even farther, so it really gets out there. And he says the following. He says, V'darash, hamachashela hazot tachat yadecha, which is Pasuk Mishael, which talks about that a mistake was made by me. Okay, get up and in public announce your mistakes. Ein adam omed al divrei Torah ela im kein nechshal b'hem. He turns it into a good thing. He says, listen, if you don't, right, it's like when you ice skate. If you don't fall, you don't really learn how to ice skate. If you don't make mistakes in Torah, you won't really learn Torah properly. Okay, why is this? So some people say, well, if you make mistakes, then next time you'll be much more careful before saying something and you'll really make sure that you understand it properly. Even though, and now he's going to say the opposite of what he said before, taking Rav Huna's lead, even though they say that someone who betroths half a woman is not mekudeshet, but in this case it works with the half-half. Why? My time because here he didn't leave anything over, and therefore the cases aren't similar. And he gets up and publicly announces, I made a mistake before, now I'm saying the right thing. But despite that, Amar Rav Shesha comes and goes back to what Rava said, or Rav Huna said the first time, which is not everyone agrees with this. Okay, so again, it's not the case. Okay, the kiddushin aren't valid according to him. And if someone tries to whisper to you and explain to you that you're wrong based on the following, I'll tell you what to respond to. Okay, so here it goes. Now, this is all based on, we've been reading these psukim of the Shifcha Charufa about a slave woman. Again, the pasuk basically says, if a man sleeps with a woman who's a slave woman, who is with, right, the words were, let me just find the exact pasuk. Right, sorry, I remember it. Asher nechrepet leish. Okay, nechrepet leish means she was kind of specified to be with a person, right, who was an Eved Ivri, assumption is. And then they say, if you sleep with this woman who is designated to this Eved Ivri, what will happen? You won't die. Okay, this isn't adultery because she wasn't married. Now, there's two different opinions about what a Shifcha Charufa is. One is the main opinion, that she's half a Shifcha, half free, and that's what right, our person that we've been talking about. However, Rabbi Yishmael holds that it's actually a Shifcha Knaanit. If you remember, an Eved Ivri is allowed to mate with a Canaanite slave while he's a slave. Okay, so we're going to go back with these two opinions, okay, in two sugyot today. So remember, these are two ways of understanding the Shifcha Charufa psukim. What exactly, right? No one really knows what a Shifcha Charufa is. Okay, is she a half-half or is she a fully Shifcha Knaanit? So now he says the following. If somebody tries to tell you, look, I'm going to prove to you kiddushin from the Shifcha Charufa pasuk, how so? Ezo hi Shifcha Charufa. So what's a Shifcha Charufa? Someone's going to say to you the following. And that's the first interpretation. She's half-half. One master freed her, the other one didn't. If somebody tries to tell you, the translation people say, right, the explanation of this pasuk is she is betrothed. Arus mu'urasa means she's engaged to. That means mikudeshet. She is betrothed to an Eved Ivri. So what do you see here? Betrothal is valid, right? Alma bat itrusehi. It seems like she could be betrothed. Again, she shouldn't be, but if she is, that the Shifcha Charufa case is where she's actually betrothed to an Eved Ivri. And then what they're saying is, even though, right, because she's a half-half, even though the betrothal is valid, you still don't get the death penalty for this, right? It's not adultery. Well, if someone tries to prove that to you, you can say, no, this doesn't mean she's betrothed. Okay, this doesn't mean betrothal is valid. Why? Because what you'll do is you'll pull out of your sleeve the other opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. And with that, you're going to disprove what they try to say. And Morlo say to him, Kalechet Rabbi Yishmael. Go to Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. Let's go there and let's see. What does Rabbi Yishmael explain about the Shifcha Charufa? Shehu omer, b'shifcha Knaanit hamurasa le'eved ivri. The pasuk is talking about a Canaanite slave who's betrothed to an Eved Ivri. Now, let's take this further. Shifcha Knaanit bat itrusehi. She can't be engaged. There is no such thing as engagement of a Jew to a Gentile. There's no validity. Yes, we can mate them. That's why we always use the word mate. He can sleep with her and have children, and the children will remain slaves. But, right, it's a very strange thing to think about that whole thing in general, that we allow that. But yes, that's the halacha. But it's certainly not betrothal. So when they use the word murasa, they obviously don't mean betrothed. They're using it in a loose way. Okay, what they obviously mean is alamai lach lemeimar, my meureset meyuchedet. She's designated. Okay, that's what they actually call a Shifcha Charufa in English, a designated maidservant. It's designated. It's not betrothed. So, just like if you go with Rabbi Yishmael, you're going to have to translate murasa as designated. Likewise, hachanami my meureset meyuchedet. You're going to use the exact same translation when you're talking about the Eved Ivri and the half-half, which means it doesn't show anything about them being betrothed. And there's Rav Sheshet with his retort to someone who might try to prove it from the Shifcha Charufa case. It's not a valid answer to say. It's not a valid proof to say she's actually could be betrothed. Amar Rav Chisda. Now comes in Rav Chisda and talks about a different case, variation on this. We'll kind of try to understand it simply, although in 2 minutes, we're going to see that they understand it a little differently. So she becomes betrothed to this guy, Reuven. Then she's freed. And then she becomes betrothed to Shimon. Shimon's his brother. So now, and they both die. She does yibum with the brother Levi on turning out Amabet. Okay, there's no yibum, you might remember this. There's no yibum if you fall to yibum on account of two brothers. Okay, I'm not going to get into the case where this happens because it's kind of long enough and I want to get through it, but there is a case where you could theoretically fall to yibum on account of being married to two brothers, and the chi of yibum is from both brothers. So this is not from both brothers because either she was betrothed to Reuven or she was betrothed to Shimon. If she was betrothed to Reuven, then a betrothal to Shimon wasn't valid. If her betrothal to Reuven wasn't valid, then a betrothal to Shimon is valid. But either way, and that's where we're going to be right now, manafshach, either way you look at it, kiddushin to Reuven kiddushin, kiddushin to Shimon lav kiddushin. Her betrothal to Reuven was a valid betrothal. Then once you're betrothed to someone and you do another betrothal, it's a meaningless act. It's just like, it's a little bit different, but the way we say, ein bishul achar bishul, once it's cooked, it's cooked. You can't do another act of cooking. You can't betroth a woman who's already betrothed to somebody else. Right? If you say the kiddushin of Shimon was kiddushin, then it's obviously because the kiddushin to Reuven wasn't kiddushin. And then again, either which way, she's either fallen to Yibum to Levi because of Reuven or because of Shimon, not because of both of them. Now we're going to learn this case a little better and understand that we kind of miss some important point, which is the shiur. Okay, and why is there a question about whether her betrothal to Reuven is betrothal or not? Itma. So she's a half-half who's betrothed to Reuven. The exact same case we just saw. Rabbi Yosef bar Chama amar Rav Nachman, pak'u kiddushay rishon. What we didn't really focus on is the shiur. What happens when she's freed? So according to Rabbi Yosef bar Chama, the name of Rav Nachman, when she becomes freed, even if the kiddushin were valid before, they're now removed because now she's a full-fledged Jew and she's not the same status anymore. Some people say it's like she's katan, like a ger who converts as like a katan shenolad. She now becomes a full-fledged Jew. It's like a conversion and she's like a new person. So any relationship she had before is kind of erased, right? Like if you're married to someone and then you convert, you have to get married again because now you're Jewish. So likewise there. Rabbi Zera, Rav Nachman, Gamru Kiddushay Rishon. He says the opposite. It solidifies the Kiddushin Rishon. At the shiur, right, you were maybe partially Kiddushin, we didn't know what the status was, but at the when you get freed by the other master, you automatically solidify the Kiddushin that was done before. Okay, so they have this machlok. Comes Rabbi Zera, and he says, I'm Rabbi Zera, the second opinion here. Notice they're both saying in the name of Rabbi Nachman. They have a debate about what Rabbi Nachman said. I think I'm right. Okay, by the way, there needs to be only one right answer here because it's what Rabbi Nachman said. He only said one thing. It's not like we have two different opinions. It's Rabbi Nachman said something, he said one or the other. So now he says the following. Lo yumtu ki lo chupasha. So now it's the pasuk says, we're going back to the Shulchan Aruch, and again, we're going to do that same game with fill in Rabbi Shmuel, also, right, fill in both interpretations and see. So first, Rabbi Zera is going to try to prove it from the Shulchan Aruch pasuk, and then they're going to reject it on account of, well, this doesn't work if you go with Rabbi Yishmael's commentary. Lo yumtu kilo chupasha. What does it say here? If a man sleeps with this woman who was designated to someone else, then you won't die because she wasn't redeemed. Now, what does that seem to imply? Ha chufsha, if she was redeemed, you would die. Now, redeemed when, right? When would you die? So right now, Rabbi Zera says it must be if she was the case is what? She's half-half. She was, let's go back to saying she was actually betrothed to the Eved Ivri. And then when she gets freed, she's now automatically married to him. So now they say, right, if she was freed, you would die because it's a valid kiddushin. So it happens automatically on the shiur. Amalei Abaye, no, this doesn't work because fill in Rabbi Yishmael's commentary. If you say it was a non-Jewish maidservant who was designated to this Eved Ivri, as soon as you redeem them, your commentary is as soon as you redeem them, it makes the marriage solid. Well, there is no marriage there. She wasn't Jewish. Of course, whatever they did before, and when she's half-half, so she has a side of her that's Jewish because she's half-free. So we understand there could be some validity to it. But if you say she was fully Canaanite, of course, you wouldn't say as soon as she's freed, oh, they're married now. No way, no how. So what's the only way you could understand this? What you tried to infer from here, when she's redeemed, you would die if you slept with this woman because she's betrothed. What it means is obviously there was kiddushin. This woman did a kiddushin with someone after she was freed. That you would have to, you skip the stage. It's not that it happens automatically. It's that if in the end, right? So right now in her status, any kiddushin is invalid. But if she were to get betrothed later, then after she's freed, and then someone sleeps with her, then obviously she's a married woman. That's the inference. So hachanami, you could say the same thing by the half-half, that it would have to be shechufsha because Rabbanit that she was freed, and then she went back and betrothed someone, and then you would say that inference. Then obviously you would die, but not if there was no kiddushin. This doesn't prove your answer, Rabbi Zera. We have a lot today of sources that we think people try to say we can learn something from, and then the other person says, no, this could go. And in the end, by the way, in all these sources, we don't know how to read them. It could be this way, it could be that way, theoretically. I mean, he does seem to reject it, but theoretically, maybe you could still read it that way. Now we're moving on a little bit, but we're still on the chetzah shipcha chetzah bat chorin. If you remember, we learned that when you have someone in this state, what does Beit Hillel agreed with Beit Shammai in the end? We force the master to free. Why? Because there's a mitzvah to procreate. Now, the mitzvah to procreate, according to most opinions, or according to the rabbis, is only on men, not on women. But there is an opinion, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, who says that women are also commanded pru revu, because it's actually told to both of them, right? It was said to Adam and Chava, pru revu v'kivshu et haaretz. So he says the commandments on women as well. So now we're going to have this following statement of Rabbi Yitzchak. There was a maaseh b'isha achat, there was a woman. She was in this in-between stage. They forced the master to free her. Kiman, so they say. Who is this according to? Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, was it that those rabbis were following the individual position, which usually we don't follow, right? We usually follow the majority. Individual position, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, and said, well, she's also commanded to procreate. To which Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak lo minag hefker na'agu. It was to protect the slave woman because the men were taking advantage of her because she wasn't specifically designated to anyone and had no option to be married to anyone. They were taking advantage of her in a sexual manner, and therefore the rabbis wanted to protect her. And they forced the master, here you see again, right? Even though you're not supposed to free, but when there's something else at play here, and either we want them to keep a mitzvah, right, like pru revu, or in this case, it was that they were taking advantage of her and they wanted to protect this woman from being taken advantage of. So, right, they, I guess, couldn't control the men. So they said, okay, well, let's at least allow this woman to marry. That will give her a man who basically she's designated to, who will then, right, married to, who will, but once she's married, either, right, the man will protect her from other men taking advantage, or also it's just less likely that men are going to take advantage of a married woman. So with that, we end that section. Okay, so let's do a quick review and then we'll end with the last part of the Gemara. So we started with this question: can you sell your slave for the knas? Then we went to the question of, if you're half-half, can you betroth a woman? Is the betrothal, you can't, but is the betrothal valid? We didn't have a good answer. Then we had a difference of opinion about if a man betroths a half-half maidservant, right? Half-half free, half maidservant, is it valid or not? We tried to bring sources either way, right? We saw in this case, at least, there were different piskei halacha about it. Some people said yes, some people said no, right? Rabbi Yochanan was proven wrong and goes out and then teaches that it is valid. But Rabbi and Rav Sheshet said it isn't valid. And we brought some proofs. And then we got into this case of what if she's freed and then goes and marries the brother, right? And then the question is, what does the freedom in the middle do, right? Does that make her betrothed? Does that solidify the kiddushin that was, or does it cancel entirely the kiddushin that was? And then we got to this last issue of, do you have to free a woman who's a half-half? Okay, is it only if you think she's obligated in procreation, or is it even just to protect her, right? If you need to protect her. And then, by the way, it would only be if people are actually taking advantage of her. If she's living in a place where the men, kind of control themselves and there's no such issue, then theoretically it would sound like maybe you wouldn't have to free her at all, which is a little unfair to her because then she can't actually marry. Okay, last part for today, we're going to start with the Mishnah and then do the beginning Gemara on this Mishnah. If you sell your slave to a Gentile, by Jewish law, the Gentile only acquires the maaseh yadayim, okay, the handiwork, but not the goof of the Eved. Only Jews acquire the body. So if you sell to a Gentile, and let's say he runs away from the Gentile, the slave is still yours. However, the rabbis wanted to discourage this because, first of all, you're taking someone who's somewhat Jewish and you're putting them in a Gentile environment. They're chayav in mitzvot, and a lot of mitzvot, they won't be able to keep mitzvot. It's not a good thing. We want to keep them among us. So they basically penalize you. If you do that and he runs away, he's not yours anymore. Basically, this guy goes free. Okay, the slave is free. Or lechutz la'aretz, they wanted to discourage people from selling the slaves to go abroad because this is mitzvah to stay in the land of Israel, even for a slave. So therefore, if you sell him to someone, Jewish owner who lives abroad, also we say yatsa ben cholim. We're going to basically free this slave. Okay, this slave is totally free. Again, the one who you sold, right? The one who you sold to a Gentile, well, he's still a slave because the Gentile thinks he's a slave. But from Jewish law, if he runs away, he's not a slave anymore, and actually he's Jewish. And this is, again, a knas, a penalty that the rabbis instituted to deter people from doing this. Tanu Rabbanan, according to Tanakama, he needs an emancipation document. In other words, it's not enough that you sold him. You also have to free him so that he can go marry a Jew, assuming he runs away from his master and wants to marry a Jewish woman. Ama Rashbag, but Rashbag says, if you didn't write this oh no, which in a minute the Gemara is going to ask, what is oh no? If you wrote an oh no when you sold him, that is his emancipation document. It doubles, okay, as an emancipation document as well. My oh no, Amarav Sheshet, that you wrote when you were selling him, you wrote that when if you run away from, or if the slave while you're writing, it seems to be like it was in the document of the sale, if he runs away from me, I don't have anything to do with him. So that's basically giving up ownership on him, and that's the get shichur. Tanu Rabbanan. If I borrow money from a Gentile, and then what happens? The Ovei Kochavim does nimus, which we don't know yet what this is, but he does a nimus. So in other words, I borrow money and I say, as collateral, you can take my slave. Okay. At what point does the slave become owned by the Gentile, which would then mean he goes free, because it's basically like selling my slave. The question is at what point, right? Obviously, if I sold him, so as soon as we do some sort of kinyan, right, and I pass him over, he's no longer mine and he's free. Question is, in this case, where I said take it as collateral, when exactly is it going to count? Or take it if I don't pay my loan, when exactly is it going to count? So according to this, when he does nimus, my nimuso, what is this nimus? Just like we didn't know what ono is, we don't know what nimuso is. I'm Rav Huna bar Yehuda, nashki. Okay, that doesn't really help us. What's nashki? It seems to be some sort of stamp or sign that they would hang around his neck. It sounds a little like dog tags or something. It's something they would hang around his neck, and then basically the Gentile puts it on saying, you're my slave. And at that point, he goes free from the Jews anyway, right? To which Mativ Rav Sheshet says, this isn't nashke, because there's a source that says, these are different types of sharecroppers. Okay, and Aris is someone who gets a percentage of what he works. Harich is someone who gets, you work my land for the season and you'll get X amount, like a predetermined amount, as opposed to a percentage of what you do. But there are people who basically work in someone else's land and get the land, get the produce as a gift, as their salary. And Arisei Batei Avot, that their families have been working for years as sharecroppers on this field. They're all working for Gentiles. So the end of the sentence is they're going to be exempt from Maser. They don't have to take Maser because it's not their land. They're just getting the fruits from the Gentiles' land. And also, Ovei Kochavim Shemishken Sadeu L'Yisrael, if it was the reverse, and the Gentile took out a loan from me and promised me his field, then all these cases, even though we did the nimus, which basically means hanging some sign on it, which can't possibly be, I can't hang a thing around the neck of the field, so that's going to prove that this translation isn't right. Okay, I'm going to be exempt from maser. Now, this is a little weird also, because nimus in the first case was you become the owner, right? That Gentile becomes the owner, he goes free. In this case, even though I kind of become the owner, I'm actually still exempt from the tithing because it's still considered the Gentiles. So that also doesn't make so much sense. But first they bring it to say, you can't put a stamp hanging on the field. There is no such thing. So El Amar of Sheshet Zman. He says it's a date. If we set a date, then presumably when the date comes, then it's mine, right? But the problem is, why am I performing maaseh, right? But if the date comes, then the slave is his and the slave goes free. So kasha zman azman. So now they relate to the second problem, which is these two seem to come to opposite conclusions. To which they answer lo kasha. It's not difficult. Both of them have a nashki, which is a date that was set. Or sorry, not a nashki, a dimuso, which is there was a date. Just one, the date arrived, that was the slave, and the other one, the date didn't arrive yet, and that's why I'm still exempt from maaseh. To which the Gemara says, you don't need to tell me that. Obviously, if the date arrived, when it becomes his, it's his. That's nothing new. It must be both of them. The date yet hasn't arrived, but there was a date written. Since we set a date, meaning it's going to happen. So in the Eved case, it's where I gave him the whole body of the Eved. And that's why we're going to say, as soon as we write the nimuso, the date is in there, it's as if it's his and the Eved goes free. Because this is going to happen and I've given him the whole slave. When it comes to the field, why am I exempt from Maaser? For a totally different reason. Because I only have rights to the payroll in this case. We didn't talk about what I had the rights to, what he gave me as collateral. He only gave me the produce as collateral. So then I'm no different from a sharecropper. All I have in the field is the produce, not the field itself. And that's why it's telling you I'm exempt from Maaser, because I don't own the field itself. And then it's two totally different scenarios. Okay, we'll start tomorrow with another way to explain this. But basically, we did the end of the daf was to talk about this knas the rabbis instituted for either selling your slave to a Gentile or selling it to an owner outside of Israel. Obviously, it's only for people who live in Israel. The slave goes free. And then we had, does he need to get shiur? If you write, oh no, then no. And at what stage, if you do it, give it as collateral, is it going to be already considered that the slave goes free? And then we brought this contradiction between, right? We brought this other source to say your definition of nimuso is not right. And then we also had to resolve the contradiction between the two sources, that in one, it seemed like the ownership was passed over, and the other one, it didn't seem like it wasn't. And then we just said they must be two different situations. With that, we finished our daf. Have a great day, everyone.